go. Greg, you're a lawyer. I'm
Yep.
a reverend.
Yep.
We're both in the American Legion.
Yes.
The two topics you're not supposed to talk about, we're going to talk about.
Hot dog. Let's
I
go.
know. I'm so excited. And so the American Legion, in the preamble has the second word is for God.
Yep.
And it's been there since the beginning, and it remains. And I think it can be a stumbling block for some people about who we are, what we represent, how we go about our business. So I really thought it might be helpful if a lawyer and a reverend sit down and kind of unpack a little bit.
Sure.
And you were agreeing, and I thank you for that. And I think the legal aspect is really important because sometimes I think some of the things that we say in a chaplain capacity in the American Legion can get us in trouble.
Doesn't happen very often, but I can believe that it could. Sure.
Yeah. And so what I like to do is you're in the American Legion, you're the judge advocate.
The department judge advocate. Yes, I am.
And so can you unpack that role a little bit for us?
The department judge advocate doesn't have any assigned duties other than to advise the department executive committee, which is our board of directors, and to handle whatever is assigned to him or her. There's very little written about the judge advocate. If you go through the bylaws or the Constitution, I don't think there are more than about 4 sentences.
Oh, sure. And in the chaplain, the officer guide and manual of ceremonies, which kind of explains how to do things a little bit, doesn't explain a lot about what a chaplain is, except some of the character traits to look for. And so the how-to piece is, I think, where we can get caught up or snagged quite a bit. One of the ways that we can get snagged up in the American Legion piece is not delineating the difference between a chaplain and a pastor or a reverend. Can you provide any insight into that legally with humor?
The legal insight on chaplains.
Yeah.
Well, as I understand it, the chaplains in the American Legion are to provide spiritual guidance and direction. They are to assist people. They are not there to advocate a particular faith,
right? Yeah,
a particular religious doctrine, and that gets. The only time I've ever seen difficulty with that is when people are starting out, when chaplains are starting out with the American Legion, and they, begin or end with a prayer including Jesus Christ.
Right. Yeah.
So chaplain should make that a little bit less about Jesus. And there are ways to do that, but, we're a big tent, and we're open to all veterans, regardless of their religious affiliation, or even if they don't have one.
Exactly. And I think sometimes that can get lost in the wash, if you will, if you do have a chaplain that's representing their specific faith. Because when you're wearing the different colored hats, kind of says what is your level of responsibility. And a white hat, which is more at a department level, has a little bit more responsibility, I would say, to be able to represent the organization. In a very welcoming manner.
It is always interesting at department conventions when we see someone come up and they're advocating a particular blend of Christianity in their own unique way. And the folks who notice that the most are the folks who've been around the longest. Kelley, I should provide some explanation about my background to talk about chaplains and pastors. My twin brother is a retired Episcopal priest. daughter who is a Lutheran minister. My daughter is married to another Lutheran minister. My wife is the granddaughter of a Lutheran minister, but I have
Okay.
two sisters, one of whom is married to a UCC pastor. Um, so
Variety.
we, yes, we cover the waterfront. And my father went to grade school, a Catholic grade school, for I think 6 to 7 years, and was very high church. Oh
Uh-huh.
man, that guy loved to go to high church Episcopal services, and
Okay.
I have to admit the Episcopalians can really do Easter quite glorious.
What do you mean? Explain what you mean by high church. I believe I understand you completely, but there's a
Yeah.
difference between high church and low church in the
Uh,
structure.
Yeah, high church is everything that you would see with Catholicism. You know, smells and bells. You've got the bells ringing. You've got the incense being swung around. You've got somebody up in robes at the altar doing things. But the Episcopalians, I mean, the highest service I've ever seen involved three celebrants up at the altar, two incense, they're called thurifers, as I recall. I hope my brother doesn't listen or she'll scold me for not knowing this. But two thurifers, holy mackerel, and a large group of altar boys and altar girls. But it is a spectacle. That's one way to describe it. It is a spectacle.
You get to be a part of something. At some level, there's a production, but there's always in the high church piece, they kind of bring out the history pieces and you get to connect. I mean, the smells and bells, they've been smelling that same smell for decades.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
so, yeah.
it can be fun, but it can be awfully long. And
Yeah.
to acknowledge a lot of my Protestant and evangelical friends, uh,
Mm,
the I would agree that the sermons at high church services are not always as good as I've heard in more Protestant oriented services.
mm,
Uh, the word, I have to agree, is terribly important, and you have to watch, and you
yeah.
have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. I, I appreciate that the American Legion recognizes our spirituality.
Hmm.
I mean, because that's our motivator of how we can come together and serve, because selfless serving, building compassion, mutual helpfulness, these are all spiritual tenets.
Well, it really isn't surprising. I mean, if you think about it, the American Legion started with the principle of acknowledging spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't they? I mean, a day, a week in the trenches of World War One.
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of men acknowledged there for the first time that there was a divine spirit, and they prayed to God probably several times a day. Get me through this. Get me through
Yeah.
this. Uh,
Yes. Yeah. And the American Legion historically has always allowed women, has been very open and inclusive, but wanted to ensure it was a complete organization, if you will. It doesn't mean we've reached it. We're always working on being accepting of one another,
yeah,
and the spirituality piece and how chaplains represent that role continues to evolve. And the military opened up the windows, if you will, of how many faith groups it recognizes.
yeah,
And I think the American Legion is kind of struggling on in that regard of how do we include more inclusive pieces, because we have Jewish people in our ranks. We have people that are very agnostic. Sometimes you can have spiritual people that are agnostic.
yeah.
We have Wiccans in our roles.
Hmm. I can't say I'm surprised about that. When
Yeah.
I was active duty, good Lord, 40 years ago, that issue was coming up. It was more of an issue for the Army. I was Air Force,
Mhm.
but I started thinking about, okay, what do I do if a group of airmen show up?
Right.
They want to have a Wiccan service. They want to do it in the chapel. I know
Right.
what the I know what the constitutional law answer is, but is my base commander going to buy off on that? Ooh,
Exactly.
that
I
was a
had my active duty service in the 80s. Command Sergeant Bobby Ray Butler at 1st Armored Division, Ansbach, was telling me that when he was in Vietnam, they used to hunt down Wiccans. If they learned that there was a Wiccan having a solstice celebration in the woods or in the marshes, whatever, they would find them and kick them out of the military.
good grief.
And
Okay.
that's what he said. And now, good grief, now that's no longer allowed.
Yeah.
We have to make space, rightly so.
Yeah.
But it was a little confusing to him on the nuances because that wasn't something in a regulatory fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a delightful subject to discuss at length,
Mhm.
and that would take hours of preparation. Let me tell you, the constitutional law cases on freedom of religion
Mhm.
really cover the waterfront, and um, I seem to remember this issue about whether Sikhs, which is a
Yes.
religion from India, can serve and wear the turban that they wear because
Yep.
it's fundamental to their faith, from what I
Yep.
understand. And that was really, I thought, an interesting question. I mean, I don't know how they get around the issue if a Sikh wants to be a pilot, and has to wear that headgear. But
Yep.
beyond that, I wouldn't. I don't understand why it would be a problem. But still, an interesting question.
Oh, they were very fascinating questions. Facial hair, and
Yeah,
then combat readiness. Like, how do you be ready? And so,
yeah,
yeah, I think they come into the American Legion realm simply because we're a veteran organization. So
hmm
you have to have been a veteran. You've had to serve in the military. So your culture where you served, um, what expectation does it pattern that culture, the military culture, or are we completely different?
Oh, we're not completely different. Uh, we're
No.
older and wiser, of course.
Oh, hopefully,
Yeah, yeah.
fingers crossed.
Um, no, in my experience, especially excuse me, especially in this job, and I've been doing this for the Department JAG for 7 years now.
Okay.
Um, I have honestly been quite surprised at how open and receptive uh, the majority of our members are.
Hmm.
Uh, you talk to them about a problem, you explain it, and once they understand, they're really quite good.
Yep.
Um, uh, the American Legion is open to every veteran who is out there,
Yep.
and um, we want to we want to help and assist veterans who are having a tough time. And
Mhm.
the only question is, are they a veteran? That's it.
Right. Right. And all of our pillars are really an extension of coming together and serving one another and being able to join forces to make something better.
Mhm,
That's because I'm on the spot now. So we've got children and youth.
mhm.
We've got security, national defense. We've got veteran affairs and rehab. And then we also have the Americanism.
Yep.
And all of those are very heavily value laden, if you will,
Mhm.
because you have to treat each other with kindness.
Well, it's also a recognition that by the American Legion that our communities are foundational to our success
Mhm.
as a nation, and in helping the rest of the world. Um, you Power derives from the consent of the governed. I'm a political junkie. I took political science at the University of Minnesota and majored in it. I got a law degree, and then I got a master's degree in public administration. If
Okay.
the public doesn't buy into stuff, it isn't going to happen.
Right.
So, and I think the American Legion has always understood that.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be successful if your kids don't have decent schools, if they're not brought up in healthy communities. So,
Yeah. And that's why children or youth are one of our major pillars. And
absolutely, yes.
how do you invest in our youth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been a terrific question. You know, we have all these competitive sports and activities for kids, especially the oratorical. And I've always wondered why we don't grapple with more controversial subjects. But I don't have that much familiarity with that program, so I should
Oh, in the
need to be.
oratorical?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The questions are foundational to the Americanism. So I think they combine the Americanism, like what does the flag mean? You know, how do you serve? What are those values? I've always seen those questions answered where the speaker has to grapple with that, what it means, and then come up with some clear,
Yeah.
not a debate, but an explanation, if you will. It's a fascinating program.
Yeah, the extemporaneous remarks competition, I think, is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful conversation with a member out of Walker, Minnesota. They have a terrific post up there, by the way. And he had, I think, a 9th or a 10th grader who he was helping with in debate. I think he was a retired attorney too. And evidently that young man did very, very well in the competition. That is so impressive.
You know, one of the things in the strain of spiritualism and the chaplains and grappling with your faith, the American Legion gives us space to delve into those deeper issues about why we're doing things. That is all about your spirituality, all about those values. And so when you're talking about community buy-in, we all want to live on a deeper level and be pretty concise in what we believe and how it's evidenced in our community.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to come together and agree on some of the values.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we've had the preamble says, you know, this is why, that mutual helpfulness.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
We say it before every meeting, and I'm glad we do, because it does establish a baseline of where we start.
Yeah. Combat the autocracy.
Yeah.
Masses.
Yeah.
Yes. And so trusting and knowing that we're going to have conflict, we're going to have debate, we're all different.
Yeah.
It sounds like your feast days at your family are quite different. A UCC and a Lutheran pastor are not going to think the same way necessarily about the scriptures.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love your point, and that's one of the things I've enjoyed about the Legion as well, is that the vast majority of us understand that we're not going to agree about everything, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you have to put issues to a vote, and we have that happen.
Yeah.
But as I've said before, I am impressed with my fellow Legion members, especially in this department. They're good listeners.
Mm-hmm. And mulling it through, thinking about all the different dynamics that are involved.
Yeah.
And this is not an advertisement for the American Legion, but I mean, bringing forth some of these beautiful elements that who we are as spiritual beings gives us the space to enter into the arena, if you will, and to allow the differences and then the bubbling up of, okay, but this is what we're going to decide to do together. I might not agree with it. There's not a lot of organizations or places in our culture today where you can come together, where you can have a Wiccan and a Catholic sit down in the same place and agree on, but the military does that too.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you have the preamble, which brings us together.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as somebody wrote, and I can't remember where I read it, when bullets are flying overhead and shells are falling, you really don't care what your buddy next to you,
Not
who
one
got
bit.
the machine gun, believes. If he's there, he's got your back. If folks back at the support base are helping you deal with your issues, you don't particularly care if they genuflect on the right knee or the left knee.
Not one bit.
Yeah,
No, because we all have these human values that we can agree on.
indeed. And
Mhm.
why we have the Constitution of the United States, which recognizes those differences. There's no requirement that you have a particular religious faith in the First Amendment.
Not one bit.
Nope.
Um, who I was talking to somebody. Oh, I was talking to a chaplain. He had served in Washington and Pentagon, and
Hmm.
was explaining why chaplains have to have a faith group, and it really has to do with taxing. It's the taxing. Yes, it's all about how your tax ID is recognized, and it has nothing to do with beliefs. It has to do with something very pragmatic, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I've gone and wandered into the briar patch of tax law on more than one occasion for the American Legion. So I understand, but it's still funny.
Yeah, we keep you busy as a judge advocate.
Yeah, there have been times. Oh, COVID. Oh my God. I put in a ton of time during COVID. That was quite the struggle. Um, but and I can tell you a story. I mean,
Yeah.
I got into quite a disagreement with the department commander, who wanted to write a letter to the governor protesting some of the restrictions and limitations
Mm.
on bars, which was impacting the American Legion all over the state. And that was Mark Dvorak. And I called him up and I told him I disagreed. I thought the letter went too far, and I pointed out some other things. And it, it was wonderful. Mark, okay, let me say right from the get go, Mark was correct
Mm.
that writing that letter was appropriate. He was, and I figured that out after I spent a couple of hours learning in fine detail what it means to be a 501c19 tax exempt organization.
There's a
That's
difference.
that's the exemption for veterans organizations. And when I got done with that, I was kind of embarrassed and I was kind of annoyed and irritated because Mark was right and I was wrong. But Mark was terrific. I mean, he did not bark at me. He didn't tell me I was an idiot or anything like that. He was really gracious.
Yeah.
And he amended the letter in other ways that I told him, if you're going to say these kind of things, you need to be right about this and this and this. And he went back and he looked at it and he amended some of those things, which I appreciated. I think it made the letter more effective.
Mm.
But that is an example of what it's like to work at the department level.
Mm-hmm.
We can get angry with each other because
Yeah.
Mike Max and I have banged heads on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
But I'm an advisor; they're decision makers. It's not
Yeah.
my job to make policy. They do. And when we remember our roles and what we're here to do, then when you get into a controversy, you understand how the game should be played. You
Yeah.
play it respectfully and honorably, and
Yep.
but you gotta go to your source material. You gotta look at the department constitution
Ev-
and
yeah.
the bylaws. So
I keep one with me all the time. I'm usually leafing through it when we start having the issues. You brought up a very clear delineation that I just want to tease out a little bit, because chaplains are not necessarily decision makers.
Mm-hmm.
They are to be models, if you will. It's always interesting how I have the word chaplain on my hat and behavior changes. And so I know for some reason they stand straighter. And sometimes language will get cleaned up. And it's like,
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
it's like your behavior should just reflect what you believe, but sometimes we need to have a reminder.
Appropriate. But I think that is appropriate because I was a public defender for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
The language I used in those conference rooms with my clients is not language I can't even imagine using with a chaplain. I mean, it's just completely inappropriate. And I would never use that language with a judge unless we were in chamber. I knew that judge would not get upset with me. But I mean, that is a great topic that we do need to clean our language up. We do need, because it demonstrates respect for one another. We don't always have to use that gutter level language to convey meaning. Ugh.
Yeah, we're capable. Sometimes we don't even know what we're capable of, and
That's
to be
true.
better. And how do we become the better version of ourselves? To me, is one of the roles of being aware of who you are spiritually, because there's that external, non-tangible connection with deity or deities, if you will. And if your deity doesn't want the best for you, is it a good God to believe in?
That is a fair and reasonable question, but Kelley,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm willing to stand up and say in this forum is that organized religion and the pursuit of a spiritual discipline is good for people.
Yep.
When I was advising my teenage clients, the last thing I advised them was go find a spiritual discipline that you're comfortable with and pursue it. It's good for you.
Yeah.
You internalize a value structure. You impose self-discipline upon yourself, which is a good thing. Human beings are much better when they have self-discipline.
Yeah. We need
The
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and life. I mean, my father really said it really well. He said, "Man, life is crazy. Things seem to be going fine. You're going along, and all of a sudden, you find yourself in a hole, and you look up. How the heck did I get down here?"
Mm-hmm.
And doing the job every day is not that hard, but getting along with your partner or spouse—that's
Yep.
hard.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah.
other people, getting along with your fellow workers, man, it can be tough stuff.
Yeah.
But human relationships can be very hard. You can I mean, think about the marriages that you've seen where you've got these two impressive people, very nice people, put together well, and and somehow their marriage just doesn't work, and you go, what is wrong? And then you see two people who, I mean, it doesn't make any sense why they're together, but it works.
Yep.
I
Yep.
I did
Yep.
divorce work for 12 years,
Oh.
and I am still astonished over some of the stuff I saw.
Mm.
But that's why we need our spiritual program, our spiritual discipline, because there are times when life is incredibly hard,
Mm-hmm.
and you need that spiritual guide sometime to carry you. And
Yeah.
the discipline of going to church or going to synagogue or going to temple will get you through it. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Spiritual disciplines are actually a protective barrier for suicide prevention, which we don't talk about too much because I think we're just too embroiled in that religious framework. You bring it up.
Yeah. Well, the sad truth is that war is a nasty business,
Yeah.
and it involves us in things that are really, really unhealthy, which basically blowing up or killing other people is bad for us. We should not do things like that.
Yeah.
But we've also learned that there are some really bad, horrible people out there in the world. I mean, everybody automatically thinks of Hitler, but since Hitler, I mean, we've discovered what an absolute nightmare Stalin was. We've seen the horror of the Cambodian regime run by Pol Pot. Dreadful. And the current nastiness that is being imposed on the Uyghur people who are Muslims in Western China by the current Chinese regime.
Yeah.
And good people need to stand together to oppose that kind of horror.
Yeah. What the military, people that are in the military learn, especially if they're in a combat zone or if they're engaged in a war, is what they're capable of. You know, there's, our left and our right, what we're capable of, and what you talk, like war is hell.
Yep.
In war, you have to find parts of yourself that you don't even want to know exist.
Yeah.
To be able to do things that your government is requiring of you, and then your battle buddy needs you to do.
Yeah.
For you to live, because life is valuable.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have wars, would we?
Nope. And we wouldn't have post-traumatic stress disorder or combat, whatever you want to call it. We wouldn't have that.
No.
The guys, it's not just the guys on the ground, the folks who go in there with, a single firearm and confront a village or whatever in some nation nobody's ever heard of. But the aftermath of war is very, very serious. But that gets us to the point of addressing mental health issues. Mental health injuries are just as serious as physical injuries and last far longer. I always think of them as kind of like burns. You don't treat a burn like other kinds of injuries. You have to treat it the proper way. And physicians tell us how to do that. It's the same with mental health injuries. I got sick and collapsed in a courthouse 12 years ago. And part of it was a mental health issue. I mean, I was overwhelmed by stress and I was too damn old to be doing what I was doing. And it took 12, 13 months for me to recover from that. And I had to stop practicing as a criminal attorney. But we all get stressed out and overwhelmed at times. And sitting down with a counselor can be enormously helpful. And I have to say that I'm really grateful for Prince William and Prince Harry out of the United Kingdom, who have been very good about talking about mental health issues. And
they've been transparent, haven't they, to a large degree?
They have been very good. And we need in this country to do a better job of recognizing that it can be really tough. And if people, I mean, think about those poor guys who came back from World War II. They'd been on those, especially the Marines out of the South Pacific. And some of the weapons they had to use to deal with those Japanese defenders who were incredibly courageous, but they would not surrender and they would fight. And what were they using? I mean, flamethrowers? Oh, good Lord. But our veterans from the South Pacific would not talk to anybody about what they had seen and the suffering that they went through for decades.
Internally, it's changed how we talk about mental health and who we are. One of the things that I know we are struggling with strongly is that spiritual identification and the spiritual practices. As organized religions decrease in popularity and people attending to them, we lose that framework of being able to engage in contemplating who we are in this world. our meaning, our purpose, our value.
Yep.
And I don't believe the internet is a complete resource when you're sitting in your home alone at midnight trying to, do I want to be a Muslim? Do I want to be a Sikh? Do I want to be a Christian? And then pulling out some of that pluralistic pieces, the conciseness. Everything have to be in community to start to evidence what you think you believe.
Yeah. Well, you're hitting on, I think, a big, big issue, which is that we need each other. You can
We need each other.
You can survive as a hermit. Yes, you can live in a cave and pray as or whatever, as you see fit, day after day, month after month, year after year. But at some point, the vast majority of us need other people. And you get that in a healthy environment when you are in a church, a temple, or a synagogue.
Yeah. Because sometimes what we think we believe isn't evidenced concretely or clearly or helpfully. I have fallen in love with our preamble only because and in religions and in any spiritual practice, the goal is to transform you into something that you cannot achieve without some external application or some external source inviting you. And the preamble invites us to be better and to be better in community and to do things that we might know are good for everybody, but require something. Human nature, I think we're hoarders as human nature. We want to protect our ego, protect our power, protect our right to believe whatever we want to, and we want to be entitled to that. And the preamble, when you're dealing with mission statements and faith, spirituality, they're inviting you to step outside of that and to examine how it benefits everybody, not just you. I think Freud made a career out of it. So
Well, I like to point out that we need ministers, pastors, chaplains, all the time. I mean, we can get so wrapped up in ourselves, and we need to be told periodically, come on, come back to the straight and narrow, come back to the good life, if you will. As you began your statement, you talked about how churches are losing membership and people are becoming, the term I really like is they're becoming more atomized. Yeah. Individuals by themselves getting through this world with this device where they have all the connection they seem to need. I don't think so.
No.
There are times when you need somebody to say, "Hey, come on, knock it off. You're too loud. You're too vulgar. You're too nasty. You need to settle down a bit." Well,
yes, but that's where we are as in the world today. How we've evolved. Yeah.
The price of civilization are taxes.
Yeah, and road signs.
Yes.
And
yes.
stoplights and potholes.
Yeah. I mean, we have good schools, and they could be better. But it's about providing opportunity and making the world better for our kids. And I think the Legion is, the Legion's not committed to higher taxes. Let me just say that. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't have any kind of statement about taxes.
Yep.
But they want their communities to be better. And we all have different ideas on how that can be done. I mean, one of the neatest statements I've ever heard is that reasonable adults can read the same set of facts and reach different conclusions. Yep. It doesn't mean one person is defective or seriously misguided. It means adults can differ in their conclusions about the same set of facts.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it is remarkable. If you go back to COVID, how many times were you confronted by the fact that, good grief, my day would be better, infinitely better, if this person were here? And it's a person who doesn't make a lot of money, doesn't have a string of degrees, does a good job. I mean, you got to have grocery stores, you got to have gas stations.
Yeah.
Go out,
Didn't COVID clarify the struggle
everybody.
that we have with individual rights versus community rights?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yes.
I mean, to me, COVID really just clarified
Mm-hmm.
the rights of whose is more valuable,
Well,
and then the aftermath of it with the judge. What's his name? The deputy who came out and said that loneliness is a health epidemic.
I think that was
Attorney General, your
no,
Attorney General.
no, it was the public health. What's he called? The public health director. I can't think of his title, but yes, he did say that. But your issue that you just raised about
Mm-hmm.
community rights versus individual rights,
Yep.
that is a controversy and an issue that we are going to continue to see over the next 10 to 15 years.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that we saw in COVID was this question about, does your religious faith
Mm-hmm.
give you some legal ability to ignore government requirements,
Yep.
to invalidate contracts, that kind of thing? Because remember, the nurses who worked at the hospital complex down in, I think, Dallas Fort Worth, who stepped
Okay.
forward and said, we shouldn't have to take the vaccine because our religion tells us we shouldn't.
Yep. Yep.
And the response of the hospital was, hey, I'm sorry that this is inconvenient or makes you uncomfortable because of your religious faith.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a clause in your contract that requires you, if you're going to work for us, to take the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court said, yeah, it's in your contract. If you don't like the contract, then quit.
You
And
already signed the contract and
yeah,
had that opportunity to determine what was more valuable to you.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
But that is going to continue to be an issue. And given the way the Supreme Court is made up, I tend to think that contract rights will prevail over religious, the religious argument. But you're going to see, I think that's going to continue to play out. And that's going to be interesting to watch.
Yes, yes, especially when we are so divided in all the different faith groups. I mean, Christianity, I think, alone has more than 200 different ways of looking at their
Yeah,
Holy Scripture.
yeah,
And yeah, every major faith group has many different subsects in it that don't necessarily agree with one another, you know.
oh yeah. Well, just look at Catholicism sometime and the arguments and fights that they're having. Holy mackerel! Uh,
Mm-hmm.
wow.
Yeah. So I appreciate the preamble says, you know, we come together, but we're going to agree on this. And these are basic human spiritual values that
Yep.
we are better together when we focus in on this. Because I know left alone in your house at 10 o'clock, you can be binge watching movies all weekend and not do anything.
Yeah.
And you can devolve into a slug, if you will. Sometimes you need to be a slug because you
Yes.
need to practice that self-care.
Yep.
But then spirituality challenges you. It should challenge you. I mean, to me, the disclaimer is if what you believe is dehumanizing to you or anyone else, is
Mm-hmm.
it a good spiritual practice to be engaged in? What is its goal? Because all spiritual disciplines have a goal to connect you to the existential reality, which we believe is good
Mm-hmm.
or for our goodness, possibly. And I know
Yeah.
that there's people on that spectrum, like, God created the world and he left. And we're on our own.
Well, I always enjoy those discussions about folks who believe that God is involved in our lives every day, and
Mm,
I have to admit I'm one of those who's a little skeptical on that. Yeah, steps in from time to time, intervenes, but on a daily basis, boy. But how do you? I mean, how do you know?
how do
Uh,
you know?
you
Yeah,
look you look at some of the idiotic decisions that great leaders have made in wartime, like Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg, sending Pickett and his brigade charging up that hill. You just go, what were you thinking?
what were you
And
thinking? Yeah,
yeah, and the Southern leadership were convinced that God was on their side, but that that charge at Gettysburg, you just okay, what happened there? I mean, is it the hubris of being convinced God is on your side that led Robert E. Lee to make that bad decision? Was it something else?
right.
Mm,
Yeah.
so who knows?
Who knows? We'll never know. I'm
Yeah.
doing deep dives into like why God won't go away. This is me personally, my own personal development, because the medical doctors is like we've evolved out of um, this religious framework that was harming to many people, is limited. I mean, we have all this medical knowledge that kind of started there. So like, what is it about a belief system that continues to exist in people? Are they just uneducated? Do they not know? And it's led them into finding where the our brain fires when we're praying or when we're meditating.
Mhm.
And so right now I'm into the piece where this is an older, and so a lot of the positive psychologies jumped off on this. Your anterior cingulate is involved in calming you down or firing you up. And they believe, so they're positing that a lot of people that have more of a fundamental faith are ones that have a stronger amygdala reaction.
Oh,
I know. The
okay.
fight or flight, either or, one or the other, black, white, control, power. That's
Yeah.
your amygdala. It's there to keep you safe. And then we've evolved as a species into the frontal lobe cortex, which is more logical, analytical piece. But the part of the brain that connects those two is called this anterior cingulate.
Okay. Okay.
And
Well,
it can be imbalanced or it can be practiced
hmm
to develop into development on one or the other.
hmm
Like if you're always resorting to anger, flashes of emotion, curse words, and you're just all the time, your anterior cingulate, like a teeter totter, is just going to prefer the amygdala. Like if you don't use it, you lose it, is their
hmm
theory. And it's making a lot of sense in my mind.
Well, that's an interesting explanation. The explanation that I've always worked with comes out of The Power of Myth, written by
Oh,
Joseph Campbell.
Joe Campbell.
And Campbell, I mean, that is a marvelous book, but I have to admit,
Mm-hmm.
I got to a couple of pages and I could read maybe two or three paragraphs, and then I'd have to put it down and think about it for a couple of days. But Campbell Campbell says, almost all cultures. Yeah, I mean, we're talking almost all cultures in the world have
Mm-hmm.
been involved in the search for the divine.
Right.
And when you look at it, what's that? From an anthropological perspective, religion existed or was developed to help people understand this dangerous, crazy world in which we live.
Yep.
But modern civilization has reduced the number of physical dangers that we confront And so we're dealing with different kinds of problems.
Yeah.
But
Can
but
ignore we can
but I
ignore our purpose to a large degree till we're in
yeah,
a foxhole and trying to figure it out. I
but
got
I
no
would
more choice.
that the problems of the future that are just starting to show up are going to be issues that we need religious faith for, that we need the assistance of those involved in ministry to help us cope with. I mean, artificial intelligence. The if you really want to study how goofy that can get, I got to
I
plug you in.
lost your visual.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
there
I am.
you are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, pick
How
up
goofy it can get.
yeah, how goofy it can get. There are all kinds of great science fiction books out there.
Yes.
What does it mean to be a human being? I mean, how many different parts have to be replaced where you're no longer human?
Yep.
And that, I mean, you guys are going to be providing guidance on that. I don't know how else we can figure that out.
Well, we're working it out on the movie screens today. I mean, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings.
Matrix.
How many movies tease out some of these deep philosophical and spiritual moral
Yep.
issues and have arrived at a decision or let us tangle with it, like the faceless orcs versus, I mean, the faceless orcs following command. I just wrote about this.
Oh, yeah.
The Borgs on Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Star Trek. Let's
Yep.
talk about these. Our place in the world, what we
Yep.
believe about.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do believe the chaplains are specifically geared like lawyers. You have the training. You've spent a lot of time contemplating and arguing about and studying where we've been versus where we at, and can talk about the issues, the complexity of the issues
Yeah.
that are involved in why is it a theft?
Yeah, that I have wrestled with that question on occasion.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we are seeing the difficulty of being unchurched in various parts of our communities.
Mm.
And it is worrisome, but there's always been struggles.
Right.
There are ebb and flows to everything.
Ebbs and flows. And what is it going to look like in 50 years?
Yeah.
One of the things that keeps me hopeful is humans, to a large degree, appreciate community. We appreciate and are better when we're helping another person or others.
Yeah.
And we innately know that. I don't know where it comes from. My belief is it comes from deity. There's a connection beyond our knowing. There's all of this research on energy, the reciprocity that we get from one another energetically, frequency wise and things of that nature. That I think we'll appreciate it, but then you can start arguing about it, which then, doesn't allow us to appreciate the goodness of a human being sitting across from you, struggling with who they are in this world, which is the greater conversation in my mind than who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I admit I enjoy a good argument, a good discussion, but that's the way I'm put together.
Yeah.
I know that doesn't work for most people, but I think you're absolutely right. If you want to feel better, if you're a bit down, if you're depressed, helping somebody with a project, helping somebody with a problem, usually makes me feel better. And helps most people. But why? Yeah, that is a very good question. Why are we here? Is only a question that a person can answer for themselves.
Yep.
And providing that kind of guidance, I have to admit, I kind of envy that. I always envied my brother for marriages and baptisms.
Oh.
And he told me on one occasion, yeah, not all weddings are sweet and wonderful, and they can be quite the trial. But the really hard issues when a family loses a child, ooh, man, I do not envy ministers and pastors and chaplains trying to cope with that. That's hard.
Yeah. I've been a part of suicide loss children. And what I've learned for me is sometimes providing an answer or explanation, or just that the vocabulary is unnecessary.
Mm.
The physical presence has its own power
Yeah.
of healing.
Yeah.
That is, in our culture, we seem to think that evidence-based, we've researched this, we've cataloged it, but there's all this evidence that humans have done where being able to just be with can heal, that I'm not alone. So when we are wounded animals, and I think we share this with the animal kingdom, when we're wounded, we might want to be alone for many reasons, but when we are tended to, that compasis or compassion is evidenced, it nourishes us and heals us.
Well, you're talking again about something that I think you are far better equipped to address than I am, and that is the fact that we are biological creatures. We're not completely different than other creatures on this planet. There's some study that said that there's a 1% to 2% difference in DNA between a chimpanzee and me.
Yeah, almost identical.
For those of you listening who say, well, yeah, but for the rest of us, it's at least 10%, it's 1% to 2%.
Yeah, they've confirmed that, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the racial distinction. I mean, one of our political leaders said at one point, when you look at the difference on the issue of race, the DNA difference is infinitely small.
Yes.
It's such a small difference. It's nothing.
But we are the only ones that contemplate the reason why.
The reason why.
We're the only ones that what is the purpose? What's the meaning of this? Why? We're the only species so far
that we're aware
of thus far. Octopuses are starting to make a strong case.
Yeah, isn't that something? Holy mackerel. Yeah, I want to see somebody play chess with them. That could be interesting.
That'll be the deciding factor. Yeah, definitely.
There's a great science fiction book about, I think it's called The Uplift War, where the objective of sentient thinking species is to find another sentient species that has not been lifted up to participate in galactic civilization or something. And that is a fascinating book when you start looking at some of the creatures that exist in our oceans, who seem to be very bright, and it's just a communication difficulty at this point. Yep. So, but we're getting far afield here, and I don't want to get.
I know that's the fun part with lawyers and reverends coming together is, there's nothing off the table. I'd like to switch tangents just a little bit because I belong to Post 184 in Pine Island. I believe that you belong to a post because that's the start of the American Legion. You are connected at a post level. You don't have to, but the American Legion belongs at, it's everything happens at the post level. And then we have different levels of interaction and assistance, if you will, for the post. But the
Yeah.
main focus is always at the post level
Yep.
because
Yep.
that's our front face.
Yes. Yep.
And
And that's how we really provide service. Assistance to most of our veterans
yeah,
is through posts. Um, yeah, I'm a member of Post 84 in Northfield.
184 and 84.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. And so, but in your position as the judge advocate, you're not the judge advocate for your post. You're the judge
Correct.
advocate for the department. And
Yeah.
so that's
Correct.
the difference. So post just can't call you up or the commanders or the adjutant and say, hey, Greg, I have a question for my post.
No, they can do that.
They can.
Yeah, if it's a business question, like what do we do with employees who are wearing political buttons while they're working and behind the bar?
Mm,
Um, that's a business question, and we stay out of that. But if they ask us questions like, we've got a treasurer who hasn't shown up in meetings and will not provide what our bank accounts are, that's getting into constitutional issues and bylaw
mm,
questions. And for
mhm.
that, we can provide assistance. But we stay out of business issues. Yeah, we don't get involved with that.
One of the things that we have not addressed that I do believe might become more prevalent is when you're representing the American Legion at the post, whatever level, and you have that word chaplain on your hat.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you the chaplain for? And who can you represent?
Ooh.
And, we initially started this conversation like, can I pray in my faith group, or are my prayers to represent because I'm speaking on behalf of? And,
Mm-hmm.
that respectful terminology. And then necklaces, what kind of paraphernalia can I wear? I see crosses all the time on chaplains. And to me, I always wonder about what type of barrier that is to somebody else that might be Jewish, um, that might want to partner with, or is it not, or is it just me? I don't believe that chaplains, this is my personal belief, because we
Yeah.
don't have anything written, that how you present yourself tells a lot of people what you're open to being able to assist with when you're wearing the word chaplain, or what kind of frame of reference you're going to be coming from. But then the military has Sikhs,
Oh yeah.
because ordained, but they're endorsed by their faith group. So I'm endorsed chaplain by my faith group. And so I have to know my clear lines. Am I able
Yeah.
to provide that or perform that?
Yeah.
And that's a good language for me to keep clear.
Yeah. Well, the level of involvement, I think, will determine to a large extent how careful you have to be. At the
Mm-hmm.
department level, you have to be careful. At the national, extremely careful.
Yeah.
Um, at the post level, I haven't seen too many problems. But I mean, I have the same issues as the judge advocate. There are times, and I've said this at some of our leadership meetings at American Legion College. The hardest question for me sometimes to determine is who do I represent
Yeah.
on a given issue. And Kelley, I wish you could attend the nonprofit law conferences that we have annually. This will come up, and
Yeah.
you've got these nonprofit corporate lawyers talking to each other, and that is a tough question. Who do you represent?
Who do you represent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it applies to a lot of us, but I've noticed that at the post level, it's really neat because the all these folks have known each other for quite some time,
Yeah.
and some organizations you've got people who've been there for 40, 50 years. Um, they I mean, a number of posts have been chastised because they're not always welcoming to the younger veterans. That doesn't happen as often as I feared originally, but
Mm.
that is a challenge, and probably bigger than signaling to people that you're open to all faith groups. But we do have to welcome veterans, regardless of what their background is
Yeah.
or happen to be. I mean, whether you're a Marine who's been in combat, day after day after day in a 4-year period, or
Mm-hmm.
20-year desk jockey like I was. I mean, did we have military related deaths in the Air Force? Yeah, I had a B-52 blow up less than a half a mile from where I was doing a discharge board at Grand Forks Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dangerous business.
Mm-hmm.
But we were all in uniform for the same purpose, which is to defend the United States
Yeah.
of America. And I think you've hit the nail on the head that um, our purpose statement that we recite at the beginning of every meeting, our,
Yeah.
our, our pledge
Mhm. Yeah.
is to do better by our communities, by each other, for national security, and to promote our Americanism program.
Yeah.
Those are good and proper things.
I think the preamble can keep us out of our amygdala and
Yeah,
remind us that we have a prefrontal cortex at this point to logically, right, exactly. And we can balance the passion and the heart with the strategic way in which we're going to do these things.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but that gets to an interesting issue about the American Legion does a nice job of rotating people through leadership positions. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things they need to be careful with is that the constant change means that you don't have, well, you're challenged by a lack of corporate memory, by remembering that one thing that happened 5, 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So but it seems to work. We keep doing good things. We keep seeing smart decisions out of
Yeah,
uh, out of Indianapolis, and that's good.
it is good. Um, do you have any parting words?
Well, since the issue is about faith,
Yep.
I will simply point out that the American Legion is not different than other American organizations. Look at the Boy Scouts; they have a very extensive spiritual program. Girl Scouts, I think, do as well. Uh, we're we the spirit is, I think, something we're built to go and find, to seek. Certainly, that's what Joseph Campbell's book, The Power of
Mm-hmm.
Myth,
Mm-hmm.
it's, and I have seen that certainly in my lifetime. But it isn't easy. I mean, uh, faith is a struggle. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we are not guaranteed. What did Kirby Puckett said? Tomorrow is guaranteed to no one.
Yep.
There is no assurance of happiness. There is no assurance of much of anything except death and taxes.
Definitely.
Uh,
Religion and
had to mention it
politics.
one more time. But um, from my perspective, as a criminal lawyer and a public defender,
Uh-huh.
what what I saw is that people who are unchurched do struggle. They I mean, when life throws major league curveballs at them, uh, people who are involved in a religious discipline do seem to handle those things a little bit better.
Mhm.
I mean, I did some research. The Pew Research Institute
Oh.
found that people who are highly religious are more engaged with their extended families. They're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to volunteer. They're more involved in their communities. They're generally happier with the way their lives are going. So I think it's a good idea. It's not for everybody. I agree.
Yep.
And we have the right as American citizens to decide,
Yep.
do we want to be involved in a religious pursuit?
Yep. And the American Legion it has that same belief is
Yeah.
we welcome you if you're a veteran.
Yep. Yep.
And yeah.
Rightly so. Rightly
Yeah.
so.
Thank you for your time, Greg Colby. I appreciate
You're
it.
quite welcome.
And
this is good.
Your contact information, I'll embed that in the description. So however you want to be contacted.
Email's about the best way to do it.
I will put it in there. So
okay. Take care.
Take care.